Alrighty, good evening, everybody. My name is Daniel, and I'm an event facilitator here with McNally Robinson Booksellers. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, and that the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Aninawak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and the Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. And of course, we are gathered here this evening to celebrate the launch of Heal the Beasts, a jaunt through the curious history of the veterinary arts, published by ECW Press. And of course, we're very pleased to have Dr. Keri Hudson Reykdal here to host a conversation with Philipp as well. So in just a moment, Philipp will read a selection from the book before joining Keri in conversation. And following that, we will have a time for questions. So if you are here in person today and you do have a question, just raise your hand enough for me to see. And then I'll come by with this wireless microphone just to ensure that you're heard on tonight's live stream for the cameras and for the folks who are watching at home. And of course, I'll be back at the end just to review signing procedure and how that will go later on in the evening. Though without further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's guests. So our host, Dr. Keri Hudson Reykdal, is a Western College of Veterinary Medicine graduate, class of 2000. And a mixed animal turned small animal practitioner in central and northern Manitoba. She gained national exposure as the star of the television series, Dr. Keri, Prairie Vet, on Animal Planet Canada, which ran for 4 seasons. In 2024, she was honored with the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association's Small Animal Practitioner Award in recognition of her important contributions to veterinary medicine, particularly in the underserved communities. And of course, Philipp Schott lives in Winnipeg, where he practices veterinary medicine, writes, and shares a creaky old house on the river with his wife, 2 kids, and 1 nutty cat. His first book, The Accidental Veterinarian, was a bestseller and was translated into 5 languages, and 6 other books have since followed. So please join me in welcoming Philipp Schott.
Hello, hey, thank you so much all for coming. I'm gonna have to update that bio. We now have a nutty dog as well. And I no longer practice veterinary medicine. I'm very good at it now. No, actually I retired as of August 1st. I'm retired from clinical practice. So still kind of lurking in the background and I'm polishing my sort of Yoda, Dumbledore, Gandalf kind of role where I will appear at random and give unwanted advice to my colleagues and then disappear again. So a little bit about the book, for those of you who don't know much about it. So obviously history of veterinary medicine. So the way it's organized, there's 22 chapters. Each one starts with a little vignette, so a little fictionalized anecdote of a historical animal healer or veterinarian. Most of them are real people. The famous ones, like James Herriot, for example, are in there. And then as we go really far into the past, which we're going to with my reading, then these are fictional people. As much as possible, I really try to stick to the facts, and what I present is as plausible as historical knowledge allows us to be with these stories. So introduce it with a little vignette just to get people in the mind frame of the time and the perspective and so on, because I want this book to be accessible to the general reader. This is not an academic work. And then from there, each chapter then goes into some explanation about the actual techniques and so forth of the time. So without further ado, we will really just read the one. I've been had some radio interviews and so on. I'm asked what's my favorite, and that's like the classic, what's your favorite child question. They're all my favorite, but I really do like this one because it is so quirky and weird. And if you know me, I like quirky and weird things. So I'm going to take us to around the year 600 AD in Britain. The Romans have been gone for a couple of hundred years. And we're going to meet, we're going to be talking about leeches, and we're going to be talking about elves a little bit. So a little fictional vignette, and then a little bit of explanation after, and then Keri and I will chat. So, chapter 6, Oswald. I am told you can heal the beasts because you are learned in the leech book, the priest said and rubbed his hands together. Whether you rubbed them together in nervousness or because they were cold, Oswald couldn't tell. Churches were always cold, but St. Martin's was especially cold. Yes, I can, Father Wilfred. By the grace of God, I have seen the leech book and I've committed it to memory. It is a great thing that Master Ball did to cause his scribe Child to compile it. And it is a great thing that King Alfred allows men such as me to study it at Winchester. Praise be to God, the priest intoned. Praise be to God, Oswald repeated, unable to stop his eyes from scanning the priest for any clues as to why he had called for him. Oswald waited for Wilfred to speak, but the priest was silent, still rubbing his hands. He was a small, old, bald man in a dirty brown cassock. Not impressive to look at, but apparently respected, and at times even beloved by his parishioners. It is my horse, Oswald, the priest said. He has been elf shot, and none of my prayers has helped. I even obtained a small phial of oil blessed by St. Cuthbert's holy relics and applied it to his head, but it has not helped either. Elf shot, are you sure? Oswald asked. These evil sprites were a plague upon the land, causing all manner of mischief and illness, but that they would attack a priest's animal on sanctified land shocked him. I am sure, yes, I am sure, the small man said. Oswald noted impatience at the question mixed with sadness and resignation in his voice. Come, the priest stood. Oswald followed him outside, through a graveyard of moss-covered crosses standing helter-skelter, to a small stone-walled paddock around the far side of the church, where an elderly white horse stood grazing. The iron-colored sky hung low, brushing the tops of distant hills. It would rain again soon. See, look at his belly. Wilfred pointed a shaking finger at the horse. The priest was right. The belly was bloated in a way that could only mean one thing: elves. Elves could be responsible for many diseases, and sometimes it was difficult to tell, but this was their signature ailment. It was good that Wilfred had thought to call him. Bald's leech book was clear on the remedy, and although Oswald had many healing talents for men and beasts, he considered himself to be something of an expert in dealing with elf-shot horses. He even had the correct tool in his leather satchel, among the various herbs with which he otherwise plied his trade. Mere village priests' prayers and dribbles of holy water were not enough against this evil. I see, Father Wilfred, the poor beast. What a curse this is, but by the grace of God, I know what to do. The priest nodded and watched wide-eyed as Oswald pulled out an odd-looking knife. It is specially made for elf-shot beasts. The haft is made from the horn of a cow who is without a calf, and it is studded with 3 brass nails. Oh, yes, I see, how wondrous, the priest crossed himself. With this you will bleed him, not with leeches? He peered at Oswald's open satchel, as if expecting to see leeches slithering out. No, not bleed, only prick the left ear. But before then, I will write Christ's name on the horse's forehead and on each of his limbs, and for this I will use the tip of the knife, but I will not scratch him. Christ's name will only be visible to the elf, who will flee immediately, and then I shall strike the horse on the back one time, and he will be made well. Thank you, Oswald. I am most grateful. The horse is old, but so am I, and we have been together a long time. When the Lord wishes to take either of us, I will be ready. But this devilry of the elves is not the Lord's doing. Indeed, it is not. The taller man drew himself to his full height and squared his broad shoulders. Now, if you can find me a stout stick to strike him at the end of the treatment, then I can begin. So that's the story. Bald's leech book was written in 9th century Anglo-Saxon England. I was wrong about the year, so we're in 800, not 600. Is one of the very few pieces of evidence we have for how veterinary medicine was practiced during the hundreds of years between the disintegration of the Western Roman Empire and the first glimmerings of the Renaissance. The book was primarily written with human patients in mind, but it also makes numerous references to treating animals. And I should point out that leech then did not, or for much of history, have the strongly pejorative connotation it has now. It simply meant doctor and was probably considered a complimentary or at least honorable title, as it referenced what was considered to be a specialized tool that lay people did not feel they could easily master themselves. It's as if we called modern doctors stethoscopes. As an aside, it's worth noting that Homer, back in 800 or 900 BCE, referred to doctors as leeches, and as recently as 1833, France imported 41 million leeches for medical purposes. So this practice has a very long history. Moreover, leeches are back. I mean, the little animals now, as they turn out to be useful in managing some wounds and for maintaining blood flow after certain plastic surgery procedures. Icky, I suppose, but then ickiness is really just a matter of opinion and perspective. Aspects of the human experience that have been fickle over the course of time. I've been limbo under it.
All right, thank you for that. So in reading the book, I'm not personally a history buff myself. Definitely my father, and he passed that down onto my niece. Big into history. Is history something that has always interested you, and is that what inspired this?
Absolutely, yeah. So when I was in undergrad trying to decide what to do, the first book is entitled The Accidental Veterinarian. It wasn't a clear course for me from the outset. History is one of the things I was really interested in, and I was persuaded that it wasn't a good way to make a living. So I went in, I was a veterinarian for 35 years, but it was always in the background. I always wondered, how can I bring history back into my life other than just reading it on a hobby basis? And then when it became a published author, I realized, hang on, first realization, I can write about history. But second realization, there are no books in print about the history of veterinary medicine written for the general reader, not even for the specialists. I mean, there's a couple of out-of-print academic works on veterinary medicine, on the history of veterinary medicine, but there's really very little. So I thought, okay. Yeah, so that's where it comes about.
Nice. I got a copy of the book, and I gave a copy to my niece as well, because I knew this would be right up her alley, being the history buff. And what she really enjoyed, and what made the book come alive for me, was the vignettes, and seeing people in the times, because it's hard to kind of understand what things were like for them back in those times, especially like going way back to Bonnie and what was it, 12,000
BC, yeah, our first.
So, and that, and as a veterinarian, of course, reading the history and reading about the different diseases, I'm like trying to guess what things were. And that story really stuck out to me, the marsh sickness. And did you find it challenging as you were writing to figure out what the diseases were, or was it pretty obvious?
Sometimes obvious, sometimes challenging. I mean, that story in particular, I mean, they would have, the Paleolithic people, 12,000 BC, they would have called it marsh sickness, right? They didn't know what was going on. We know now that the puppy had distemper, whether he died of distemper or not, we don't know, probably died, as we both know. It's still highly fatal, even with our modern veterinary technology. What I find fascinating about that particular story is that, at that time, 12,000 BC, people would have been buried with valuable grave goods. So they would have been buried with like an axe or a sword or something that would be useful in the afterlife. There's no way a sick puppy is useful in the afterlife, right? So this tells us something about human-animal bond being present at that time already, right? That there's really no other explanation. This was a burial, not just accidentally human bones and the puppy bones being together. A lot of the other diseases, no idea. And a lot of it is large animal stuff, where honestly, I'm more qualified to look at human children now than I am at horses and cows. So I was like, I hope I don't get in trouble with large animal vets.
So in writing the book, obviously a lot of research went into it. How challenging was it to amass the information? Where did you find it? and how much reading was involved just to write this?
Yeah, no, good question. It took a while, like bits and pieces over a couple of years. I mean, thank goodness for the internet. The internet is a horrible thing in a lot of ways, but it's a great thing in a lot of other ways, and it allows mere mortals like myself that don't have research grants and so on to access primary sources, and as much as possible access primary sources. And it's wonderful, all the original documents. So this Ball's Leech book that I talk about, this book from the 9th century, it's online. It's like British Library, it's there, and then you use Google Lens to try to with the weird handwriting that you can't make out, use that to flip it to modern English, and Bob's your uncle. I mean, so all this stuff is accessible. Sometimes it takes a little more digging. There weren't a lot of books to read because there just hasn't been a whole lot written on this. There's some biographies in the more recent times. There's a lot about Jaunt or Louis Camoudi, the first cat veterinarian and first house call cat veterinarian, ministering to the cats of celebrities in Manhattan in the 1940s and 50s. I've got his biography, it's written, all my patients are under the bed. So for the newer stuff, there's that, but going back, yeah, it's original source like this illustration that is from an original manual for looking after hunting dogs in medieval France. So all that stuff is accessible, and thank you, Google Translate and Google Lens. I give full credit to where credit is due for that sort of thing.
Did you find that, like, in times of war, that there was more stuff written that you could kind of delve into a bit more? For
some things, yeah. Like I have a few different theses in the book, and one of them is that a point of change, like a point where public attitudes towards animals and towards the need for veterinary care changed. It was during the Napoleonic Wars. It was like late 1700s, early 1800s, particularly when the reports came from the Battle of Waterloo, and I don't have the number at the top of my head, but it's in there. The mass slaughter, of course, obviously mass slaughter of humans, or tragic loss of human life, but the British public was really taken by what happened to the horses, not just horses killed, but sensitive people. Close your ears now. I'm going to describe something gory. Wandering around with their intestines dragging on the ground or their eyeballs hanging out, stuff like that. I mean, and it was the time of the Enlightenment, so people's attitudes were shifting a little bit towards the natural world and so on, and that was a spark then. So there's a fair bit written from that time, to your question. And also then, from a practical standpoint, the British military looked at it and said, shit, we're losing all these horses. You can make a cannon in a matter of a couple of days. You can't make a war horse in a matter of a couple of days. These ones that are wounded that can be fixed, we need to try to figure out a way. We need to get a professional approach to getting these horses back on the battlefield. It was all about cavalry warfare then.
The other thing as a veterinarian that I found interesting was how rabies appears throughout for centuries.
Yeah.
And how it seems like it was fairly prevalent.
Oh yeah.
And I think we just take it for granted. There's vaccines now. We see it, but it's very rare. But I found it very interesting how common it was.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have that perspective here in the developed world, but in the developing world, there's still tens of thousands of human deaths with rabies on an annual basis. Mexico, India, especially, sub-Saharan Africa, and so if you take that back into history, a lot of our ancestors, certainly mine, are from Europe, but it was a real scourge. And the problem with rabies, there's lots of problems, but a big one is how horribly you die. Again, sensitive people, it's just a nasty, nasty business. And once you have symptoms, you're done. And you'll have symptoms for a little while. It's not quick. You'll have symptoms for a little while, neurological symptoms, and you will die. It's a 100.0% fatality rate in humans once you're symptomatic. Actually, that was the first case ever. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in just in the last couple of months there was a young boy where they were able to reverse it. It's the first time in recorded history. So the crazy thing, throughout the book, I touch on all the really wacky cures for rabies. Like people were very creative and inventive in the past, but there what was it, like the turn over put this together now. The rooster's anus was one over the wound, and a lot of this is comes from false correlation. It's a psychological trick, right, where you do something once and something seems to happen. So this person probably didn't have rabies in the first place, or this dog didn't have rabies in the first place. Seem to have similar symptoms. You put the rooster's anus on it, I can't remember, you rub it, or you put it right on the wound or something, or you suck on it or something horrible. And they get better and they think, aha, I have the cure. And now the word spreads that is the cure, but they made a false correlation there. It doesn't work. Don't try that. Promise.
Well, and I think we find that these days as well, that things get better despite what we do.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
One last question, and another interesting part is in the shift from agriculture to more urban lifestyles, and then the shift from animals just as work, like workforce, to pets, and what drove that. And you talked about the I'm trying to remember the lady, I'm trying to think of the name, that you talk about the connection to nature, and that's partly why we have pets now, is that connection.
Right.
And so I thought that would be an interesting inspiration for another book, is that that natural connection and how that evolved. But did this book inspire you to write something else?
Not yet. I'm always like 4 projects ahead. I'm doing something on World War II history again. People are interested in that sort of thing, on fascism. Yay, fascism. How to defeat fascism, to be clear. My grandfather was a fascist. And more abandonment mysteries. But there are more themes in veterinary medicine, veterinary history, and the human-animal bond, and our connection with nature that I would like to address at some point. And this is one of my theses. Like sometimes we start to feel some people feel a little guilty in a way about the love they have for their pets or their animals. They think this is, just a kind of a Western affliction or something, but it's not. When you look into history, this is not just prosperous people in modern times. People that don't have pets, they have that critique that people have pets. It's throughout history, throughout all cultures, all times, all places, people connected with animals. It's in our DNA, it's in our nature to have that connection. There's going to be exceptions, sure. But as a really broad statement, it's true. I had a hard time finding exceptions, and people made efforts then to medically look after that which was precious to them. Now, it was precious for different reasons at different times. There was a long period in Western culture where it was more the practical was predominant, where animals were used for their muscle power or to be eaten, as they still are, or in war and so forth. But the emotional connection was always there, and I think we're kind of coming full circle. We think in the ancient times that people would have had a much more practical approach, perhaps, but that's not true. That story from 12,000 BC, but lots of other stories. In the Middle Ages, you had a cow. That was your life. Like, you really depended on that cow, and you lived with it. Look at these medieval dwellings that people live with their livestock, and there's no way they did not have emotional connection with these animals, that these animals weren't precious to them, both because they would starve without the cow giving milk, but also because they develop a relationship. How can you not? Right? So veterinary medicine is just the natural outgrowth of a very natural thing, inclination that humans have. we beat up on ourselves a lot as humans, but I think for that we can give ourselves a pat on the back. We're a very altruistic species, really.
We'll open it up to questions now if you guys have some, but just one further comment, if you haven't read the book yet, what I really enjoyed about it is, I mean, the stories combined with the history, but also the humor that he throws in, and when you get to poof eel, you'll understand. Did we have some questions?
Bring them on.
Do you know what the elf shot actually was?
Oh yeah, so yeah, I should have read longer. Thank you for that question. So here's the thing about elves. Yeah. So people in the so-called Dark Ages, we're not supposed to call it that anymore. It's the early medieval period. So people in the early medieval period in Britain were plowing, and they had better plows. They developed better plows. They're plowing a little deeper, and they were turning up little arrowheads, and they had no conception of history. They knew that the Romans had been there at some point in the past, but really no idea that there had been Paleolithic people thousands of years prior. So they had no real explanation for why are these little arrowheads there. So, I mean, what comes to your mind if you think elves, right? So that's what people went to, is they said there were elves, and also there were these mysterious diseases in their animals. 1 + 1 = 18 in this case, so that must be why the animals became sick. So my theory, and I've not read this anywhere, but my theory is these guys like Oswald, they also gave some advice on the side. Okay, I've done this ritual. By the way, you might want to take them off the fresh grass for a little while, and the elves tend to hang out there, that kind of thing. So, but the other thing was these guys were itinerant, right? This is pre-internet, like quite a ways pre-internet. So you'd never be able to track them down again. They didn't have like a leech shop. He'd come roaming through town, and does anybody have any elf shop animals? Okay, I'm your man. And if things didn't work out, well, he'd be over the hills, and you'd never know, and you'd never be able to hunt him down. So that's how that worked.
Did you ever, in your reading, run across examples of maggot therapy in veterinary medicine, when that started?
What sort of therapy?
Maggot therapy?
Maggot therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah, maggots to clean out wounds. Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with it, but I didn't run across any references to that being used. I'm sure it was. It just wasn't part of my research and reading. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It's not one of those icky things, kind of like leeches, but they actually can serve a purpose.
Just one at the back.
So we're approaching October and Halloween. What about familiars? How are they treated in the past?
Yes, thank you for that. Familiars, okay. Good that you ask, and that there is actually a reference to familiars. So I talked about, backing up a step, bigger picture, practical reasons for looking after animals, meat, power, that sort of thing. Emotional reasons, close connection. There were spiritual reasons as well for looking after animals. That depending on the culture, they were different. So, in Hinduism, one of the very earliest veterinary texts is primarily on elephants, but in Hinduism, there's a belief in reincarnation. So this animal could be your grandfather. So that's another reason to maybe look after it. Or you could become an animal at some point. Incidentally, it's that I should have read from that one maybe, because that's all about how to give an enema to an elephant, which is an extraordinary thing. And it's described in great detail there. So it's something for you to look forward to. But other spiritual in that sort of realm, shaman, for example, all through Central and Northern Asia, and also in indigenous cultures in North America, there was a shamanic connection to animals where people essentially became the animals. But familiars is a great story about Prince Rupert. So the Prince Rupert, that Prince Rupert BC is named after, and Rupert's Land, that this area used to be called Rupert's Land, was named after. He was a royalist during the English Civil War, so it's like 1640s, somewhere in there. And he had a dog. named Boy with an E for some reason. He was a poodle, like a kind of a regular poodle, white, fluffy. There's a picture of him in there, like a painting, and he looks quite cute. Cromwell's forces, so English Civil War was the royalists against the parliamentarians, Oliver Cromwell leading the parliamentarians. They thought that Boy, that Prince Rupert was an amazing military figure, and they thought part of his success was that Boy was his familiar and was essentially Satan, and Prince Rupert had this connection then to Satan, and that Prince Rupert could only be defeated if Boy was killed with a silver bullet. And he was shot, whether it was a silver bullet or not, I guess we don't know, but the parliamentarians claim yes, that was the thing. And this also goes into the witchcraft, basically the European equivalent of medicine. Women in the Middle Ages were often accused of having familiars, black cats famously, but also little birds and so forth. And these people would have been very closely bonded to their animals as well, even though they weren't necessarily familiars, and would have had reason to use their herbal craft to try to heal and treat these animals. Thank you.
Hi, I'm looking at the parallels between, the extreme parallels now between veterinary medicine and human medicine. And I'm looking at some of the ways that you're talking about the previous treatment of animals and wondering if there was much parallels, if you saw there was at some point where veterinary medicine began to mimic or imitate or whatever you want to call it, human medicine, because it doesn't strike me that they were really that similar.
Yeah, so a few different things going on. One is that for Oswald, for example, the bit that I read there, Ball's Leech book was written primarily for human medicine and their animal references. So there weren't really, other than in ancient India, the elephant enema guy, there weren't separate veterinarians. These are people, healers that usually dealt with all species, and the distinction wasn't very strongly made. So if you go far enough back, it was merged, it was the same. And then it started to split off. Even within human medicine, there were splits based on class reasons. Physicians top, then surgeons, then dentists. It's kind of split up that way. And veterinary medicine was practiced by a number of different types of people, like farriers, for example, that were looking after the horseshoes. Today, they're looking at horseshoes today, were in the, say, in the 18th century in Britain, were largely responsible for a lot of horse healthcare. Now, modern times, we're seeing that convergence again, and veterinary medicine in my time in practice in the last 35 years has technologically caught up. In some ways, I think we exceed. I hope I'm not going to offend any MPs here, but we have a little more freedom as veterinarians, and we can do a little more and do it a little quicker and to take more risks and so forth. Yeah.
We're waiting for another question if anybody else has. I was interested to read about women in veterinary medicine, and actually surprised how, I mean, it took a long time for women to be accepted, but there was it a lady from Switzerland?
The very first female veterinarian that was accredited by like a veterinary college was, she was Ukrainian or Russian, educated at a Swiss university, but we don't know anything about her. Nothing's recorded in history, couldn't find anything at all. So we've got in there, I think, did I use Eileen Cust, the Irish veterinarian? Is like there's a cluster of them in the 1890s. There's one in Australia, one in Ireland, and then one in Chicago. I think I write about her too. They graduated around the same time, but these were like super pioneers, not just pioneers, but they were like decades ahead of the surge that happened. You know, I started vet school in 1986, and that class was about 70% female. The flip had happened just a couple years prior. Like it was just mid-80s that it went from 50-50, past 50-50. When the vet college that we went to in Saskatoon, at Western College of Veterinary Medicine, when they graduated their first class, do you know this? I think it was just one. I think it was only Joan Stewart Hage. I think she may have been, somebody can correct me, 1 or 2 female veterinarians. So it went from an almost exclusively male profession to now an overwhelmingly female profession among young veterinarians, ahead of all the other professions. And it's a good thing for the profession, because I think I think women bring something to the profession that was long needed.
Joan Stewart Hay was a veterinarian I worked with for about 30 years. She, in her stories, there was 3 women in her class.
3, okay, thanks. Yeah.
Yes, who had a very interesting time. And I believe there was 2 and 1 in the classes just before her.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from anybody? For Philip or the book? Okay. How are we feeling over here? Oh, did you have? Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
So now, after all your books that you've written on this, is it any part of the curriculum for veterinary?
It should be. I say, veterinarians are really hard on themselves, and I hope, I've written it for the general public, but it also is dedicated to veterinarians. But let me read the dedication here. I remember what I wrote. Honestly, I wrote this 2 years ago, so it takes a long time to work through the publishing. This book is dedicated to my 500,000 or so colleagues worldwide. We're far too humble about what we have accomplished. I think it's true. I mean, we're a bunch of introverts, self-critical. You wouldn't know it from looking at 2 of us up here. But yeah, and veterinarians are super hard on themselves. A little darkness here. I think we still have the highest suicide rate of any profession. Yeah, it's rough. I mean, and so we need to celebrate a little bit and celebrate our story and what we have done. Good things, bad things too.
My great granddaughter is wanting to be a vet. She's just turning 15 in grade 10. So I'm gonna get her to read this book.
Lovely, thank you.
Oh yeah.
This is more just a comment than anything, but Dr. Schott was our vet, well, not my vet, but our dog's vet. And just to kind of extend from that comment about vets not thinking as highly of themselves as they probably could, I think what moved us every time was particularly when our dogs died and we had to bring them in, and the way it was a real humanity that was applied to taking care of the dogs. We weren't rushed, we were supported, we were encouraged, and I think that's the same for a lot of people when, because that's pets can't speak for themselves, but the vets kind of step in and form that bridge between it. So, if there are any vets in the room, or if you have any colleagues, or you got your own vet, I mean, it really does make a huge difference. And I can remember after Annie, one of our dogs died, we actually wrote a letter to the Birchwood group from her up in doggy heaven. And it was basically, she was saying, thank you for taking care of me because you're the ones that could do it the best. So that's just a little side comment.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Okay. Unless anybody's holding any other questions or comments, I think we can move along to the signing portion. So thank you again, everybody, for your comments, your questions, and thank you to ECW Press as well for making this a possibility. We are going to move along to the signing portion, so signing will take place just right here to my right at the table. Feel free to have a copy signed before you pay for it at the cash desk. Just make sure you don't walk away without paying for that. They don't like when that happens. Yeah, again, thank you to both Philipp Schott and to Keri Hudson Reykdal. Thank you, everyone.